Hello and welcome to YouMatter. Hello and welcome to session 24 of YouMatter, where I am interviewing quite a remarkable young man called Daniel Biggs. Daniel is currently studying his final year for a doctorate at Glasgow Caledonian University, and he is studying burnout in physiotherapists in the UK. And this is something that hasn't been done before. If you research burnout in physiotherapists, you won't find that many papers full stop. And the ones that you will find will be from other countries around the world. And I am thrilled, not thrilled that there's a need, but thrilled that Daniel and his colleagues are looking at this. It's so important for us to get this kind of baseline data so that we can look at the true picture and then start discussions about how to actually address the issues and what we can do about it. So I'm so pleased to talk to Daniel. As I say, I was so thrilled to hear that there is a team doing this work. You will find the discussion really interesting, and I guarantee there will be aha moments, light bulb moments, things that really make you thoughtful. So sit back, enjoy the episode, and I'll be back at the end. Hello and welcome to session 24 of YouMatter. And I'm really pleased today to welcome onto this episode Daniel Biggs. Daniel is currently studying his final year for a doctorate in physiotherapy at Glasgow Caledonian University. Daniel also holds a first-class BSc honours in strength and conditioning from York St John University, and his background comprises a 15-year career so far in fitness, strength and conditioning and physiotherapy, working in professional sport throughout the UK. And he also lectures at the University of Highlands and Islands, Perth. There's some great names there for universities, aren't there? So Daniel, welcome. I'm really, really pleased that you agreed to come on to this episode to talk to us mainly about a study that you've been involved with or are currently involved with about burnout in physiotherapy. So first off, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Hi, Joe. Nice to meet you. Thank you for your invitation onto the podcast. It's something that I've been looking forward to being a part of. And yeah, hopefully we can talk about the study and burnout and physiotherapy as we go along.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely hot topics for a few years now. And I was thrilled to see that this study was taking place. I hadn't heard a lot about it, but I suddenly saw some emails asking people to come forward as candidates to be involved in the study. And because of the work I do, I've seen lots and lots of studies about burnout and related topics, particularly in relation to medics and sometimes nurses, but not an awful lot with physiotherapists. So I'm just interested to know how the study came about.
This is essentially a sort of an extension to my thesis that I'm working on, part of my doctorate. So I'm spending some time looking around what's occurring in the realms of physiotherapy, be it physiotherapists and or physiotherapy students.
Right.
And so part of my thesis was to investigate what kind of levels of perfectionism and burnout are occurring in student physios or physiotherapy students. And I did that for the majority of last year. I found some really good results, and it's kind of suggesting that the higher the perfectionistic tendencies of the student is leading towards higher levels of burnout.
Right.
I think that you can understand if you're wanting to be perfect at a certain subject, then you are looking at maybe higher levels of burnout because you want to be perfect in your results. And so we're finding that actually the levels of perfectionism in physiotherapy students are actually higher than maybe some of the other subjects students can be taking. So there's a sort of element of physiotherapy students that are quite high in perfectionism. Obviously, we're not going to be a student for very long, maybe 3 or 4 years, and then we go out to the world and become physiotherapists. However, that perfectionism is probably going to be still in us. And now we wanted to be perfect at achieving results at university whilst we studied physiotherapy. However, we want to be perfect at now being a physiotherapist, and we're still exposed to burnout. So my first research project was looking at perfectionism and burnout in physiotherapy students. There's now an opportunity to make this into a wider subject, and we're looking at actually, well, what's occurring in physiotherapists across the UK. And so, yeah, we've got a study out at the minute, open to UK-based physiotherapy, UK-based physiotherapists that are measuring the levels of perfectionism, the levels of burnout, and we're also incorporating moral injury into this study as well this time. We want to see if moral injury is also playing a factor. What are the levels of moral injury? What are the levels in burnout? And what are the levels in perfectionism across the UK physiotherapists? So, yeah, it's really an extension of my sort of thesis, but we're thinking, well, actually, physiotherapy students showed it to be high. What about if we go into the industry and look at physiotherapists ourselves? I mean, we know at the minute, NHS are, we're going through a lot of pressures in the NHS, and burnout is probably going to be a resulting factor into the pressures that are occurring in the NHS. So, yeah, it's a really good time to sort of measure burnout and perfectionism and moral injury, because we know physiotherapy students are exposed to this, and we're probably thinking this is going to translate over to physiotherapy itself. And also, we've identified that there's not really much data out there looking at UK-based physiotherapists' levels of burnout. There is plenty of data worldwide. There's studies that are from Japan, from Poland, Saudi Arabia, that are measuring levels of burnout in physiotherapists in the respective countries. It's suggesting that maybe some countries are showing moderate to high levels of burnout, but there's not really a study that sort of tried to capture the levels in the UK. So, if we can make a really good go of this, and we can get lots of physiotherapists to undertake the survey, it's about 10-minute long survey, we can really capture what's happening in the UK in realms of perfectionism, burnout, and moral injury. So yeah, that's how it came about.
Lovely, thank you so much for that explanation. Let's just take it right back, because I'm aware that some people listening may not be so familiar with the terms, and I mean, burnout almost is a lay term, isn't it? And you hear it used not just in professional language, but in conversations, at the school gate, and people talking about their jobs out of healthcare. So it's almost like there's a lay understanding of what burnout is. But when I've looked at it, there have been a number of definitions. I mean, I became familiar with the sort of 3 criteria that the World Health Organization first ascribed to it, to do with emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, decreased efficacy. With burnout specifically, in your studies, are you working with that definition of burnout or something else?
Yeah, absolutely. What a word it is, burnout. As soon as you hear it, you've kind of got an idea what it's describing. And I think it is used in various different media platforms to describe what people, I think, when I've, done some personal research on what burnout is, I think most people tend to think about physical fatigue.
Right.
Quite synonymous to physical fatigue, burnout. However, like you were mentioning, there is like a bigger, broader, complex definition to burnout. So it's not just physical fatigue. Absolutely, it is part of it, but it's not just it. There is exhaustion to it, which is the physical fatigue, but there's also mental, emotional fatigue that also should be part of that dimension of exhaustion. We should look at it from an exhaustion perspective. And that way we can see it falls under the physical, emotional, mental exhaustion. And you also mentioned about depersonalization, and absolutely, yeah, we're using that as part of our study. So depersonalization, or cynicism, care towards your work or study has decreased, and you are taking a more cynical view of possible outcomes. So yeah, there's also that realm of burnout that should also be considered. And then there's a third dimension as well. So the reduced sense of accomplishment. And typically, the feelings of competence, successful achievement in your work is reduced. What you were feeling was successful when you entered, or maybe at a midpoint of your career, now feels heavy going and isn't achieving what you used to feel. And you're thinking, well, actually, maybe burnout is a bit deeper. We've got these three dimensions that we're looking at. And even though we may be thinking burnout, physical fatigue, I'm not tired, but I just don't value what I'm doing anymore. You're thinking, well, is that burnout? Well, yeah, because it meets one of the three. And so you might not be physically fatigued, but you might have a reduced sense of accomplishment towards your work or, study or whatever it is that you're working towards. And so, yeah, we're using the definition that encompasses these three dimensions, like an exhaustion, a depersonalization, and a reduced sense of accomplishment. And you can score high in one and low in the other, depending on your role and how long you've been working in that role for, of course. But also you can score high in all three or low in all three. Hopefully you do score low in all three. That would be fantastic. We don't have levels of burnout. But yeah. When I've looked at the literature, I've seen generally is high in all three. So they do correlate with each other.
Yeah. And I'm kind of surprised, stroke shocked to learn that you so far your study has been with students, and maybe you could look at it and understand a level of mental exhaustion. A physiotherapy degree is no mean feat, and you could understand that, and perhaps the decreased sense of efficacy a little. If you sort of went into your degree thinking that it would be something and you're not quite achieving the results that you thought you would on placement or things like that. But it's kind of shocking to hear that cynicism particularly might be starting to show itself as early as student days.
That's concerning, isn't it? So maybe we can think about the typical student. They're going to university for the first time. This is their first year, and hopefully they have ambition, and they think, at the end of the degree, I'm going to come out, I'm going to be a physiotherapist. However, if burnout can manifest within the student, and you're more looking and thinking, well, actually, what I thought physiotherapy is, I've done a couple of placements, and this is not what I thought it was. I thought it was, maybe they've seen quite a sport-orientated physiotherapy role, and they thought that maybe they're going to be working with athletes the whole time. But actually, I think it's 80% of physiotherapists are NHS based, and actually, then therefore, the placements are going to be more NHS based, and you're working your way through many different placements, and these placements can take forms of multiple realms. It can be orthopedics, it could be pediatrics, it could be working with patients have suffered stroke, or maybe even patients with learning disabilities. And in order to go into a placement, and there's a variety of different placements, you have to be adaptable. You have to reflect on your placement and think about where you want to go. Can I adapt to these different environments that I'm working in? Maybe I'm only here for 4 to 6 weeks, but these 4 to 6 weeks are challenging. And I thought I was going to be working in sport for the majority of it. I wanted to work with athletes, but now actually I've got to do maybe 1,000 hours that are more sort of not aligned with your goals. And you're thinking, well, actually, do I have second thoughts about this? And the cynicism creeps in, and you're thinking, well, maybe this isn't for me. So it's certainly there. Maybe we don't talk about it as much as we should, but burnout in physiotherapy students, I measured it. I'm working for publication towards the project, so hopefully I can show that as a publication form in the near future. But it is there, and we ideally we don't want it there, because if we can have the student come through and really grab physiotherapy studying by the horns, and you're thinking, okay, this is for me. And when the person then enters physiotherapy, they're fresh and raring to go, and the patients can benefit from this passion. However, maybe I'm talking ideal world here, and there's more things to consider. But it is certainly there, and we got to try and find various ways on how we can maybe find strategies to cope or prevent or treat it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and let's absolutely make sure we come back to that sort of, what do we do about it topic. I'm intrigued though. Did you come up with the idea to conduct this thesis because you were seeing evidence of what you thought was burnout amongst your student colleagues, or feeling within yourself? Was there anything personal about it?
So for my undergraduate dissertation, I was looking at perfectionism and exercise dependence and how this was linked to each other, but also there was this motivation element within the association between the two variables. So in my third year undergraduate dissertation, I was exploring investigating perfectionism with a mediating effect of motivation that then leads to exercise dependence. So I'm thinking, well, again, the higher you are in these perfectionistic tendencies, if this is then mediated by maybe a coach or a significant peer that's saying, actually, no, you're not going to exercise today, and is taking a really sort of negative, thwarting your needs role in coaching the athlete and saying, no, you're not very good. I don't think you should be training today. This is thwarting the athlete's needs. It might be a motivational tactic, but however it occurs, and the athlete feels like the needs are thwarted, but the person has this high perfectionistic tendencies. These tendencies are like, hey, no, I need to be perfect. I need to be. I'm motivated to achieve a very high standard. This is then leading towards exercise dependence, or synonymously, exercise addiction. So if I'm thwarting the person's needs and saying, no, you're not exercising today. However, the person's high in perfectionism, this is then showing a pathway that leads to exercise dependence. And I was really lucky. In order to work with my dissertation, I managed to lead it onto a publication, and that's out there if people want to check it out. But what's come from that is, I'm thinking, well, when I was researching perfectionism, when I was researching exercise dependence, not only did I see exercise dependence was linked to perfectionism, but also I saw burnout was also linked to perfectionism. I'm thinking, well, to be addicted to exercise, to be susceptible to burnout due to the association of perfectionistic tendencies, I'm thinking, well, okay, there's something not quite right going on here. So then, naturally, my inquisitive mind explored the role of perfectionism and burnout. And I could see perfectionism and burnout, there's quite a big link in the literature in sport. There's quite a lot of evidence that shows perfectionism and burnout in athletes. There is an association there. So I was thinking, well, if this relationship is occurring in sport, why can't it be occurring in other realms of life? And I was undertaking my thesis at the height of COVID. It was the pandemic, it was lockdown. The opportunities to go out and do research were limited in a sense. I couldn't really go out in the field with my tape measure and start measuring stuff because we were it was locked down and we were locked in. However, there was an opportunity to use computers and try and maybe do some research via the internet. And the great thing about measuring perfectionism, burnout, exercise dependence, there's psychology realms, and we can do that via an online survey. And so it was a little bit influenced due to the pandemic, due to lockdown, that I was able to then craft a project that was looking at perfectionism and burnout in physiotherapists or physiotherapy students at the time. So it came about from previous research that I had done. I guess it was shaped by the pandemic, and here we are exploring these realms ever since.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's almost, it seems to me, taken as read that there is this perfectionist tendency amongst not just physiotherapists. I know it's talked about a lot in relation to medicine as well. And you alluded to it earlier in our conversation that the perfectionist part of us wants to be perfect so that we're beyond criticism. Create this perfect scenario, or get all the perfectionist wants to get all the criticisms in place and correct for everything before anybody else gets a chance to criticize, doesn't it? But I'm just wondering, why is it that physiotherapy is particularly appealing for some reason to that perfectionist mind? Has the study, presumably your study has involved a series of interview questions. Has it thrown up any further insight into why such strong association between physiotherapy and perfectionism?
Absolutely. I think it's a great question. It's something that we've tried to capture and are still trying to capture. And there are quite a few different models out there that measure perfectionism.
Right.
We're using the Hewitt and Fletz model for the study. I think it does a really good job. It sort of describes perfectionism as 3 dimensions. So
could you just say the name of the model again, Daniel? I didn't quite catch it.
Sorry, it's Hewitt and Fletz.
Hewitt and Fletz.
Multi-dimensional perfectionism scale model.
Yeah.
And I'll talk a little bit about it, and then that will then hopefully then lead into what's occurring in physiotherapy. So 3 dimensions. Firstly is the socially prescribed perfectionism. This dimension suggests perfection needs to be achieved to meet acceptable standards from significant societal colleagues. So maybe the coaches, maybe it's your boss at work, or even your parents. And so you're trying to capture absolute flawlessness. So your boss, your coach, your parent can't say negative things, because you have achieved absolute flawlessness. It's only going to achieve praise. And you're thinking, well, people who I see as significant in society aren't saying bad things about my performance. And this is the socially prescribed perfectionism. We want to achieve perfectionism in order to meet an acceptable standard from a significant society colleague. Yeah. So that's the first realm. And I think that might be contributing to the physiotherapy, but we'll explore the other ones and we'll come back to it as well. The other sort of side of perfectionism that's quite well prevalent that's occurring is self-orientated perfectionism. And this is a dimension that suggests perfectionism is natural, is innate, and there's an impulse for absolute flawlessness. Okay, so it's just within the person. We want to be perfect. We are setting exceedingly or remarkably high standards for ourselves. Okay, so for oneself, we want to be perfect. We want to set personal standards and goals exceedingly high, and this is just within the person. We are ambitious. We want to achieve these ambitions, and we want to be perfect at what it is that we've set out to achieve. So we can see now from 2 aspects. There is an external aspect from maybe mum and dad, or a guardian or a coach, but then there's also this realm of perfectionism from the self. I want to be perfect at this. This is something I am passionate about. I am very ambitious. I want to achieve it, but I want to achieve it with perfection. And so my exceedingly high standards and goals are pushing me on to this. And these are the 2 sort of dimensions that are very popular in the literature in how to measure perfection. It's either from the self or from an external perspective. However, the Hewitt and Fletz model also do a 3rd dimension. I'm quite a fan of this one as well. So we can see the previous 2 dimensions are about the person, or about the athlete, about the physiotherapist. Absolutely. However, there's this final dimension that's called other-orientated perfectionism. And this is the person wanting absolute flawlessness from colleagues, from friends, from families. So I'm actually thinking, I'm very ambitious. I'm achieving a lot of things. Why aren't you? Yeah, so I'm hypercritical of others when failure occurs. And I want the person on my team, whether it's in the department or, on the sports team, to also be amazing. I want you to be amazing. I'm high in self-orientated perfectionism, or I'm high in socially prescribed perfectionism naturally. Why aren't you? I want you to achieve just as much as what I'm achieving, because if we can achieve as a team, or as a two, we can achieve a lot more. And so other orientated perfectionism is looking at absolute flawlessness or being hypercritical of others. So,
and all of that makes so much sense, doesn't it? I mean, I'm sure there isn't a physiotherapist, definitely me included, sitting here thinking, yes, I can totally relate to how great it felt to get praise for achievement from parents, teachers, sports coaches, whoever. And I enjoyed it so much that I would push myself harder to do it. There's this internal drive that you describe, innate, maybe literally some people born with a stronger drive to achieve that perfectionism. And I hadn't considered that third one, but goodness, if that is the case, and we're in a profession where, it's almost coming through in our personality, our social conditioning, and then we're in a profession where possibly there's a tendency to drive each other even harder into that perfectionist model. Yeah. And how cruel that we go into a profession where perfection is almost impossible, or obviously it's impossible in any sphere, but you choose a profession where the predictability of success is very low because of the variability in humans and patient responses.
Yes, we are in a high pressure environment. We feel that there is a responsibility to look after patients. Maybe patient suffered an acute stroke, and through maybe a series of weeks of rehabilitation, we're trying to work with the patient in order to stand up, maybe move the thumb, even just move the thumbs. And, we've got that sort of responsibility, or maybe we feel that we have that responsibility, or that patient has that expectation that our work is going to lead onto, maybe either getting back to a baseline or pushing on from a baseline. It's a high pressure environment. And I think perfectionism really manifests in that environment. So, we're certainly exposed to it due to the nature of the work. How can we best sort of keep on top of it? Hopefully we can explore this a little bit later on as well. It does kind of link to burnout as well. But that's what's
and
occurring.
I'll be really interested to follow your and your colleagues' path with this, Daniel, because I have this little armchair theory that there's almost a graph of feelings of satisfaction or confidence levels in physios. Understandably, low points when you're a student and you feel that you don't know everything. It seems from my experience of conversations with colleagues and through coaching physios that there's then a little bit of a high. You do start to see some successes, and you feel the benefit of that, and that feeds your probably your perfectionist and your pleaser and all the other archetypes we could name. Then perhaps a little bit of cynicism because not everybody responds in the same way, and oh goodness, I learned this thing and now I'm getting that challenged. Maybe then rises and falls depending on what courses you do, places that you work, colleagues you learn from, perhaps dips with having a family and things like that. But I'd be really interested, I'm really intrigued to hear that you're studying further into the profession, and it'll be interesting in future years to see if there is a kind of pattern to all this.
I think we've collected data so far in the study. We want to keep the study growing. More UK-based physiotherapists can take part into the study. However, early results are suggesting that perfectionism is well and truly in the profession. The people have already, the early results are suggesting perfectionism is high. What we've looked at, burnout is high, and moral injury is also showing to be quite high. These are the early results. I'm not going to say that this is what definitely is occurring, but when we've just done some early analysis on this, it is certainly suggesting all three are looking to be quite high.
We just pick up on moral injury. Sorry to interrupt you, Daniel.
Of course,
So we haven't spoken specifically about moral injury, and before we came on air, you and I both admitted that was probably the term we were least familiar with, even though it is starting to be used perhaps a little bit more recently than the other two?
Yeah, it's a topic that is growing.
Mm.
Perfectionism has 30 years of evidence on it. Moral injury is quite limited at the minute. So we're using moral injury from a stance where the individual's morals, conscience, and values have suffered a so-called injury from perhaps a trauma or an injustice that leaves the person second guessing the fundamentals that they once knew so well. So they're second guessing these values, and these symptoms are portrayed through a series of different dimensions, so like betrayal, guilt, shame, moral concerns, a loss of meaning, difficulty forgiving. There's quite a few ways, quite a few symptoms that are sort of manifesting that creates moral injury, but it is a growing topic. And we thought, well, actually, we're looking at perfectionism, burnout. It does kind of lend itself to incorporate moral injury. It's a growing topic. Values and morals are well grounded in a physiotherapist. We've spent time looking what our values are as a physiotherapist, what our morals are. As this leads to the decision, your clinical reasoning in decisions of what it is that the course of treatment you've decided for the patient. And if injury occurs, or so-called moral injury occurs, and through a trauma and injustice, your once grounded values have now left yourself second guessing. And as we saw, this may lead to the depersonalization, the cynicism, or the reduced sense of accomplishment realms of burnout. And we're thinking,
you can so see why in these times, can't you? When people are working through COVID and conditions have been really, really challenging. Perhaps there isn't the facility or the equipment that you need. You don't have the time available. And as you say, that's such a challenge. If you're somebody that went in to physiotherapy with very clear ideas of what you wanted to do for people, and then repeatedly through circumstances way beyond your control, you're prevented from doing that. You can completely understand that this is almost injury to your personal value, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. These are the values that you once held, and they were values that you once held for quite a while, maybe even through childhood. They've been crafted and through studying and research, and you think, actually, that does align with my values in life. I am very much a person that wants to help people, or rehabilitation, whether it is for a physical or a mental perspective, is something that I really value in my life. But then maybe it's through different policies and procedures or parameters that now you are working within that have made you then question, well, actually, is there scope for this? Is my value something that I need to reconsider because of an injustice or a trauma that may have occurred? And that's then suggesting moral injury might be higher in the person, and that may lead to reevaluating where you are in the professional life and maybe adopting new values. And where do these new values lead you in your career or personal life? It's definitely prevalent in there as well, and just more research needs to be done around moral injury. It's something that can grow, and we've talked about it, and there's betrayal, there's guilt, there's shame. It lends itself quite nicely to just more research. So if a budding student or researcher is thinking, what could I do, what can I look at for my dissertation? Well, maybe have a think about what's occurring in moral injury. And is that something that you could consider for a research project? Because it probably will be quite well received in terms of scope of room of exploring moral injury in. I mean, obviously this project's looking at physiotherapists. Maybe there's something that you're working on that would lend it quite nicely to moral injury in a sports science role, or maybe occupational therapy or something like that.
Okay, so Daniel, this feels like a little bit of an unfair question, because you are one of the first people, you and the people you're working with are one of the first to actually, as you say, produce data and show the picture of where we're at in the UK. I hear
in the UK,
there have been studies in other countries, but so, you know, it really does feel that we're at stage one of let's look at what the situation is. But do you and the people you're working with have hopes as to where this research, what it might support? I can just imagine some people listening in and going, well, you know, this all sounds pretty depressing, but this is the situation we're in. Now that we know about it, so what? Now we just know how bad it is. Do you
exactly. Yeah.
have any thoughts?
So what? So we're talking about it. Fancy, lovely, but can we actually get pen on paper and do something about it? Yeah, absolutely. But there are a number of frameworks that have shown to try and tackle burnout. That's tried to maybe think, well, perfectionism is good because it pushes us onto achieving a very high standard, but at what sacrifice? And maybe it is bad. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in that case. And yeah, you know, maybe I'm just sort of researching it and we publish it, but what happens after that? So there's definitely scope, and there should be scope to then try and see, well, burnout levels are high in physiotherapists. Let's try and do something about it. There's research out there that suggests on how we could do this, like the treatments or you know, sort of the sort of framework that we can use in order to try and reduce the levels of burnout. And yeah, hopefully I can try and do this justice and talk to maybe people, the listeners here, and you know, the suggested routes on how to decrease burnout.
And I say it's unfair because I appreciate, you know, there's a lot of work in just creating the data at the moment. But yes, if you could give any flavour of, you know, what the light at the end of the tunnel might be in terms of things we might be able to do about it.
Absolutely, it's not looked at physiotherapists. There's, you know, very limited data, very limited research around burnout being reduced in physiotherapists, but there is research around, you know, different industries and how we can reduce levels of burnout in nursing, or maybe it is in business or medicine. Absolutely, there's data around that, and maybe we can adopt that sort of perspective on how it's being done elsewhere, and then translates over to physiotherapy. Obviously, yeah, we need research behind it in order to say this is working in physiotherapy. But as you know, we're one of the first to try and look at it. We need to pull in some data. We need to pull in some research from somewhere in order to then have a framework in what to do for physiotherapy. So one of the most successful that I really like is the rotational of duties. So if we can think about not going to work and we're going to be doing the same thing over and over again, and we're thinking, well, actually, there's a different kind of rotations within physiotherapy. We know that because, you know, you typically NHS, you do maybe 2 years of rotations, and my placements are kind of on a rotation. I do orthopedics, I maybe work in stroke, I might work in learning and disability. And so if we can maybe get some rotation in our job, this can alleviate the levels of burnout.
Some variety.
So one sort of nice framework, nice example that I'm pitching to maybe the team leaders that are listening, or maybe the passionate physiotherapists that want to then grow this, is try to create this framework that's looking at rotations. So I'm just going to give a couple of examples of maybe a rebound therapy or a hydrotherapy. We could use this within patients. Obviously, I'm not saying definitely rebound. It has to be hydrotherapy, but just for example purposes. And you know, maybe we organize a small project within the physiotherapy department, and on a Monday, one physio A would do rebound therapy. On a Friday, physio B would do hydrotherapy. And for maybe it is for a 6 or 8 week block, physiotherapist A is in charge of rebound therapy, and physiotherapist B is in charge of hydrotherapy. And you know, they work with the patients within these realms. At the end of the 8 weeks, physiotherapy C comes into rebound therapy, and physiotherapy C is now working for 6 to 8 weeks in rebound therapy. Physiotherapy A has moved over to hydrotherapy for 6 to 8 weeks, and physiotherapy B has gone back to just normal, typical workings within physiotherapy. And it's that rotation around different responsibilities and different opportunities to work has that sort of alleviating effect of burnout, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And I work in the private sector and have done for a while. And, my initial thought is, oh, well, there's a lot of MSK physios working in clinics and they don't have the opportunity so much. I'm just mindful, a lot of people will have seen tweets and posts from Jack Chew this week about what he calls the Timperley Trundle. So it's a project that he and the people that work at his clinic initiated for local people, and it's a walk with some exercise prescription and some functional capacity measures built in. And he's done this lovely video, and there's lots of very, very happy customers. But I've spoken to Jack about this personally, and he was telling me how, his physiotherapists are fighting to be the one that does the Timperley Trundle that week. And it makes total sense, because it's clearly an environment where you're making people very happy and you're seeing results. And at the end of the day, that is the sort of antithesis to that moral injury side, isn't it? That totally feeds the values that most of us went into.
Absolutely. And maybe, for the walk, it lends itself, maybe it's not rebound therapy, maybe it's not hydrotherapy, because maybe they don't lend themselves over to the private sector as much, or maybe, it can manifest in sport, but it is the sort of grasp on responsibilities that are then rotated around. So like you're saying, people wanted to do the walk. Well, give physio A the walk for 6 weeks, because physiotherapist B knows that at the end of the 6 weeks, it's their responsibility. And, they can shape and mold the walk into whatever they want to, obviously within the realms, within certain parameters, of course. But, they can put their stamp on that walk. And, therefore, this is shown to really alleviate burnout levels, because you've got some rotational duties, but also you've got maybe an opportunity to put your stamp on something. Maybe it is just for 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's a really important point, not for everybody, but, I really see the value in giving people, like you say, a chance to put the stamp on something, maybe a chance to improve something, but it not to be their responsibility forever and a day.
Exactly.
To feel that joy of a little win, success.
Yes. And then also when you're off your responsibility, so you've done 6 weeks of the walk or hydrotherapy, we then should be promoting the opportunity to reflect on for the physiotherapist to reflect on how did the 6 to 8 weeks go. You don't have to sit down and use a reflective cycle or a reflective model or anything, but just sort of processing things about what went well and what could be different next time around. And you've got physiotherapy B doing the walk, and physiotherapist C is up next, so it might be 12 weeks until you get the walk again. But within that 12-week period, maybe you've seen something online, or you've had a light bulb moment when you think, actually, when it comes back round to my turn to do the walk, maybe I should incorporate that as well. And that way you're then looking forward to then thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to incorporate this because it makes sense of what I've seen. I want to know how it works. It's obviously going to be safe, and I want to put my stamp on it. And, you've got a chance to reflect within that 12-week period until it comes around to your turn again. You're thinking, well, it went well last time, but I want to do it differently. And then, at the end of that 6-week block, you're thinking, well, it went even better than the first week block because I've had a chance to reflect and, change a few things. And there's opportunity for personal and professional growth within that.
Yeah, it's building. Is there anything in any of the frameworks you found that might address the physical and mental exhaustion? Because again, I can almost hear people listening in and going, yeah, but there is just always too much work to do. Until that's taken away from me.
I think when you think burnout, how we can alleviate burnout, I think holiday jumps out at you. You just go somewhere that's sunny, you can sit on the beach or just take a rest. Absolutely, yeah. And if you can do that, absolutely would encourage that as well. But reflection is really important. Just think about what it is that's occurring. Why do you feel like this? And take some time to maybe do some reflective practice. there is quite a lot of research. Again, it's not necessarily in the realms of physiotherapy, but it does lend itself over from quite a few different realms. We're trying to relieve burnout through cognitive behavioral therapy. That's quite a very popular way and has shown to be successful in order to relieve burnout levels. And it's also shown also for perfectionism as well. So if you're trying to reduce some of your perfectionistic tendencies, this CBT also can lend itself to perfectionism and burnout, which is fantastic, really.
To try and reset that internal narrative. There's an interesting point, actually. I interviewed many episodes ago Dr. Petchy, who's an expert on trauma, and we touched on that a little bit when we were talking about moral injury. And she's actually made some interesting recommendations in certain instances where there may be a fairly significant traumatic response. So, unfortunately, people in medical careers will encounter incidents that will significantly affect them psychologically.
Yes.
And they're finding actually specifically in that incident, CBT and talking therapies are perhaps less advocated. And there's this thought that talking therapies possibly drive the trauma response deeper.
Okay.
So she's definitely not saying not CBT for an awful lot of the things we're talking about. I was just interested that specifically in a trauma sense, CBT possibly is less advocated. I think they're actually looking at changing.
And my realm is physiotherapy, and if psychology is saying, well, not in this instance, then absolutely we should listen to that. But from a research perspective, and how we measure, baseline 1 compared to baseline 2, the evidence suggests that cognitive behavioral therapy can reduce burnout and perfectionism. However, what the specifics are to this, we should absolutely take into consideration before we go ahead and apply it. But from a research perspective, it's encouraged, but maybe we need to then think about what the specifics are, and actually maybe it's not right at that right time.
In every circumstance. I completely can see the value of it in relation to perfectionism and situations where there's this kind of general identity trend, and even the bit you were saying about resetting values, to an extent that ties in with resetting that internal narrative, doesn't it? The things that are repeatedly going around in your head, and you're telling yourself that you're not being true to your values. And I was intrigued to hear you say maybe there's some work to do on shifting those values. And I'm sure you weren't meaning, suddenly don't have a value of wanting to help people, but shifting the value set slightly, that it
values can change. Yeah, values can change. But they're always, or they should be true to you. Don't change them for the sake of changing them, but through life experience, they may gravitate a certain direction that you didn't see coming 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, Daniel, talking to you, I keep forgetting you're a student. The way you talk about the profession and the insights you have, are way beyond certainly what I would have had at student level. And I think it's hugely valuable to the profession as a whole, what you're doing. But I'm really, really pleased that you have started at student level, because a lot of people talk about these issues and there's a lot of debate about where to start. And there is no right answer, but logic would suggest that, if you're finding that some of these issues are starting to embed themselves at student level, or maybe even have the potential before you enter college because of the type of person who's likely to apply, and even looking back at screening for who comes in to do these degrees, I think it's such valuable work that you've done, and anything coming from this is going to be hugely valuable. So I, for one, am very grateful for what you're doing.
Thank you. I actually feel quite privileged to be able to sort of work in this, work in physiotherapy, and 2, work in maybe academia and looking at whether it's lecturing or research, and maybe then specifically looking at perfectionism, burnout, and moral injury, because even just from a personal perspective, I find it interesting.
Yeah.
So not only can I help the profession grow, the research around it grow, but also I'm learning myself with what I'm finding out and being able to, develop new educational resources and purposes that we can then put in practice, and that's benefiting the wider industry. So, yeah, thank you so much. I feel privileged to be able to, well, one, come on the podcast, and two, work in this realm of physiotherapy.
Oh, absolute pleasure from the podcast point of view. So I just want to finish up with a couple of invitations for people listening. The first is, if any of the stuff that Daniel and I have talked about has touched you, has rung bells, has made you thoughtful, particularly if you feel that you're experiencing any of these things yourself, please do seek support, maybe initially with your colleagues and leads at work. But if you need signposting to anything more specialist than that, then if you can't find the right signpost where you are, then by all means get in touch with me, and let's make sure that this kind of stuff is raised and talked about, and that we're more familiar with spotting it in ourselves and in our colleagues, and we're more used to knowing at least the first stages of what to do for ourselves and others. And the second invitation is, if you would like to be involved in Daniel's study, then please do get in touch. I know Daniel and his team are taking candidates for the study until the end of the month. Is that right, Daniel?
Yes. Yeah, please, by all means, if you're a UK-based physiotherapist, you would be eligible to do this survey. And the survey is about 10 minutes long. It's just looking at your answers of your thoughts towards perfectionism. There's a few questions looking at your burnout levels, and then how you feel about moral injury. And so, yeah, it takes about 10 minutes to complete. You just press the submit button, and that's it. It's just a one-time questionnaire. If you want to, I've gone, is opportunity to maybe do some interviews afterwards. If you submit your email address, we could talk to you as a interview. It's not guaranteed, but we're looking to try and do some interviews after that. But if you don't fancy that, and you just want to contribute to what we're trying to find out here, it is just one questionnaire, once, a submit button, and that's it.
Perfect. Am I right in thinking you have to be an NHS-based physiotherapist?
No. We've tried to open it out to physiotherapy as broad as we can. So if it is sport-based or private-based, you're more than welcome. And obviously, 80%, as I said, is kind of NHS. So it is sort of, there is a small bias, obviously, because there's 80% of NHS physiotherapy. But that doesn't mean you have to be. If you are working privately or in sports or elsewhere, please get involved as well.
Okay, great. And we'll put the link to the study with the notes for this episode. But if people just want to Google it, how would they find the place to get involved in the study online?
I've also got my Twitter handle as well. So Physiotherapy R7, and I've got my link on there. So please, if you want to have a look through Twitter, find me on my handle there. And I'm also have some communication with Joe. So maybe look at Joe's Twitter first and find Physiotherapy R7, and then click onto my handle, and you'll see my link on that as well. So you can do it that way, or contact directly, and I can send the link through.
Great. Well, yes, you're right, Daniel. There's definitely lots of things on my threads on LinkedIn and Twitter, and I really hope to be involved in the study and hopefully stay in touch with you and the team. And
I hope
really
so.
interested to see where it goes.
I can't wait to release what we found and see what we can do from there. So it's been really good, and I'm really excited about what can come from it as well. Lovely.
Thank you so much for being here today and for the work you're doing, Daniel.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Daniel. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you food for thought, perhaps in relation to your own personal situation, perhaps in relation to colleagues and the organisation that you work at. This really feels like just the start of an important conversation. Like Daniel and I said, gathering the data, gathering the baselines, and then really sitting down and asking ourselves how we can improve things, how we can change things. Please do get involved with the study. We're deliberately sending this episode out early so that you've got a chance to get involved before they close the doors for submissions to the study before the end of February. So please do follow the link attached to this episode and get involved. The more data we have from a greater variety of physiotherapists working in different environments, the better. And as I said at the end, if any of the topics touched you or made you thoughtful about any feelings you're having, or perhaps if you're concerned about colleagues, please do talk about it, do raise it in your departments, in your organisations, or by all means drop me a personal note, personal email, joe@mehab.co.uk if you would like some support and possibly some signposting. All right, that's all for now. End of session 24, and I will see you next month for session 25. Take care. Oh gosh, I almost forgot. Take care, yes, but in a very specific way, because remember, if you are someone working in physiotherapy or another healthcare profession, looking out for people all day, every day in most spheres of your life, particularly if this has got to a point where there are any shadows or echoes of anything like burnout, then please do stop, breathe, and crucially, talk to someone about it, because you matter.